Hello and welcome back to the stories that brought you here. It's the podcast dedicated to the stories of the people from Pender Island, British Columbia. Once again, I am your host, Chris Wakaluk, and I'll be sitting down in one-on-one, hour-long conversations with current Pender Island residents to hear the stories that brought them to this poetic little island we live on, and to also hear the stories that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. Today, I'll be speaking with Leslie McBain. Now, if you know Leslie like I know Leslie, then you're going to know her as that woman that's been hosting the Speakeasy. That's a monthly event at the Legion where people read their original works of art. Well, we are going to get to hear Leslie talk about that in a very poetic way, along with many other things. We're going to get to hear Leslie talk about her experience growing up in Edmonton, being a young hippie, and then moving to California for 26 years. We're going to get to hear Leslie talk about a skate park that she helped develop on the island that was at the community hall. As well, too, we're going to get to hear Leslie talk about the loss of her son, Jordan, and her subsequent involvement in co-founding Moms Stop the Harm, a group that's aiming to raise awareness about addiction and also, more importantly, help to change drug policies within the government. That and a heck of a lot more in this interview, and I just want to thank Leslie very much for her candor and openness during this interview. And, you know, I ask people during each interview who's helped you along the way on Pender Island, and one of the people who's helped me along the way is Leslie. Leslie's been a real bright light in my life, and I really love having her around and love interacting with her. And it was a real pleasure to get to do an interview with her, and it's a pleasure to call her a friend. So I hope you will get to enjoy Leslie's company while listening to this interview as much as I enjoy her company. So without further ado, here's my interview with Leslie McBain. Leslie, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's nice to be back in this room in your basement.
Yeah, back in this room. I know. We just talked about this. I took a reflexology practicum years ago, and you were one of my practicum clients.
It was so nice. Yes.
Was it so nice?
It was lovely.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was free too. So I think that was really a very attractive feature of it.
Yeah, anytime people are massaging your feet for free.
It's a good thing.
It's a good thing, definitely, right. For sure. Anyways, yeah, well, let's get to the first traditional question, and that is, what brought you to Pender Island?
Well, what brought me here originally is that my sister, Diane McBain, has a farm here and has had a farm here since I believe the 70s on South Pender. So my ex-partner, Carl, and I were living in Oakland, California for many, many years. I was born and raised in Edmonton, so I am Canadian. I just want to make that clear. And we were coming up to visit Diane for, many summers for a couple of weeks. And we were living in Oakland, California. We had a business there. It was a plumbing contracting business. At its largest, there was 40 employees. It was something that was overwhelming for us. We weren't really happy in that business. We worked way too hard. It wasn't that rewarding. So one summer, I think it was in the summer of 89, we came up, visited Diane, and had a beautiful 2 weeks here on Pender in the summer in August. And as we were leaving, actually we were driving back down to California, we crossed the border, and I kind of had a emotional moment. And Carl was driving, and I was in the passenger seat, and Jordan was in the back in his little baby seat, and I just started crying. And it was just sort of this overwhelm. And so we pulled over, and Carl asked me what was happening, and I said, in a moment of brilliant clarity, I just said, I want to live on Pender Island. And he said, so do I. So it was a big moment because we were returning to Oakland to this big business with all kind of contracts, back to a life that really had become not that fun at all. So about 2 weeks later, we actually made an arrangement with one of the people that was on the island here, who was a real estate agent at that time. We phoned her and said, here's how much money we have. We want the impossible. We want waterfront, acres, etc. And so line it up and we'll come back. And so really only a few weeks after that did we fly back here. She took us to 5 properties. The first one was the one that I now live on, that we've had now since 89, 10 acres on the water. It had water access only. That's why it was cheap. But we did eventually get a road. And I've never regretted it for a moment. It took us 5 years actually to get back to Pender, because we had to finish all our contracts, sell our business. And that basically took 5 years. So we got here in 1995.
Okay. Well, there's so much to unpack there. I want to know more about what this business was like that you were running in Oakland. Specifically, what were you and your husband doing?
Well, it was a plumbing contracting business. And Carl had learned plumbing while he was going to university, so as his sort of summer job. So when we had gone to Europe for 18 months. We lived in a Volkswagen van for 18 months after we finished university. And we came back thinking, okay, we better do something grown up now. And so we started Pacific Plumbing Systems in Oakland, California. And we started, as most businesses do, with one employee. And by the time all was said and done, we had about something like 38 plumbers and a couple of office staff and myself. Carl's parents came to work as well. It was contracting and service. So we had big contracts for new construction, mostly commercial, and some service work. It was big. It was many times I would think to myself, I never thought I would grow up to be a owner of a plumbing business. What am I doing here? So yeah, it was very easy to leave.
Yeah, but you said it took 5 years to actually...
It took 5 years. Yeah, it was kind of a brutal 5 years, but we did it. And we were always ones to take risks, thinking we'd land on our feet, and always did. So.
Okay. And so you hit the island in 95, and I'm sure you've set up a bit of a network through your sister and visiting prior to that, or not really? Not
really. I remember meeting a woman who's amazing and I admire so much, and who's still my friend, Jan Kirkby, at a fall fair back in the day, somewhere in there, 95, or maybe even before we moved there. And she and I clicked and really liked each other right away. And I thought to myself, well, if I have one friend and it's Jan Kirkby, besides my sister, I'll be fine. So, that she was on my mind for a long time, and we're still friends. We've been friends all through. Yeah.
Okay. So you moved to the island. You've got one solid friend, Jan Kirkby. You've got your sister. And so how were the first few years living on Pender?
Well, I'll tell you, it's like stopping banging your head against the wall to move out of a city, to move to Pender. I mean, for me, I always had in my mind that I want to live rurally, in a rural area, and be, in the woods. And part of me said, oh, that's just a romantic notion. Everybody wants to live in the woods. Nobody wants to live in the city. Yeah, sure. But actually, the fact is, I could not leave Pender if you paid me to do it. I'm so happy. I was happy from the first day I arrived, and continue to be happy to live here. I would never want to live anywhere else. So the transition, I was probably kind of lonesome at first. Oh yeah, okay, I remember Jackie Main, who's another institution of Pender Island, who I adore, invited us to a party at her house. And she used to have these awesome bonfire parties, and you couldn't even tell how many people were there because it was dark and in the woods, and there was a bonfire and people are singing and smoking pot and just having a general good time. So I thought, oh boy, I've arrived. I've been invited to Jackie Main's party. And so we went, and sure enough, it was very welcoming and fun experience. And I think that's when I stopped worrying about, oh my gosh, how will I ever make friends, or how will I ever fit in here? So I think that was a turning point socially. At the same time, Jordan was starting grade 1, the fall after we moved there in June, to Pender in June. So he was starting school. And so I got really involved in the school for a long time. I was PAC chair for more years than I wish to admit to. I'm sure others were getting tired of me being, but no one else wanted to do it. So I always got elected every year. But so I was PAC chair for a long time and was really involved in the school.
And so PAC stands for Parent Advisory Committee?
That's it. Parent Advisory Council.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Exactly.
No one else wanted the job?
No, it's a hard job because parents have different ideas about how things should look and work and issues that they have. And so, it's kind of like herding cats sometimes, but we really had a good group of parents. I mean, it wasn't that hard, but it's not an easy job either. So people weren't jumping up and down to take the position.
It's volunteer as well too, right?
It's volunteer, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's sometimes people are not jumping up and down for volunteer positions.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, I just want to back this up a little bit here because, and I have to give credit as well too. I've mentioned this to you, but I'll just mention to the audience that part of the reason that I came up with this podcast is because of a conversation that I had with you a few years ago. There was a few people I've talked to along the way that triggered this idea to come up with this podcast, and you were one of them. And it was in a car ride that we took together where you saw me on the ferry and you asked where I was going. I said I was going to downtown Vancouver. You said, can I give you a ride? And we have shared so many conversations prior to this, but it was in that car ride where you told me quite a few details about your life before moving to Pender. And I thought, wow, I didn't know this about Leslie. So let's try to go there and see what happens here. But how did you wind up moving to California originally?
Oh boy. Okay. Let's see. So backing it up to the early 70s, late 60s, actually, the late 60s. I was a hippie. I was a hippie wannabe. I wasn't too sure because I lived in Edmonton, It was, what are hippies really? Well, I kind of wanted to be a hippie, but I wasn't sure how to go about it. So make a long story short, let's see. I moved to Banff. I was also a skier. So moved to Banff, lived in Banff, met some crazy ass skiers and got into smoking pot. So I could tell you one story about that I love telling just because it's just so strange to hear it now. We were living in Banff. We were living up at Lake Louise. And as anyone who skis knows and goes up there knows, there's a place called the Post Hotel. Back in the day, the Post Hotel was just a little log building with a restaurant and a few rooms. But that's where the Greyhound bus came in. And it would bring packages and it would bring whatever people, and people leave and go to Edmonton or wherever. So we all decided, my friends and I decided to chip in and buy a pound of marijuana, which was, I think at that time, somewhere in the neighborhood of $70
what?
Or $75.
Wait, where can you buy this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you have to go back in time. So we sent off our money to someone. I wasn't the person who did this, so I can't remember where we even found this person, to Vancouver. We sent our money to Vancouver and we waited, and it was almost like a movie. After about 2 weeks, we would all go down to the Post Hotel at 7:00 when the 7:00 Greyhound came in to see if our package was there. And days and days and days went by, and maybe weeks. No package. And then one day, the package arrived, and it was like this giant celebration. So we all rushed over to somebody's trailer where we lived. A lot of us lived in trailers down there in Lake Louise, tore open the package, and sure enough, there was a pound of pot. So we just started smoking it. And we spent that winter, skiing, and then in the evening smoking pot. Maybe we smoked pot in the day too. I don't remember, but it was so fun. Yeah. So that's one story from then. And then I had lots of friends there, some really great folks. And one of the people was a guy named Bruce, and he was from California, and he became the boyfriend of my friend Mary. So the ski season ended, and we decided to go to California. We'd saved up some money. There's a story there, but I'll save that for another time. We saved up some money, and we took a month and really quite a nice little big bag of pot with us. Crossing borders, who cares? We just had no fear in those days. And we took a month to travel down to San Diego. where Bruce had friends. So we ended up having surfing when we were by the beach, going through Death Valley. Sounds like I was a big doper, but, giving people pot, peace and love. And it was so fun. We ended up in Santa Barbara, and I stayed there for 10 years. That's where I started my life in California. I met some people who were trying to sell a little restaurant in the campus town of Isla Vista. And I asked my dad for some money because I wanted to buy into a business. I think I was 19 or 20. He thought I was crazy, but he very generously lent me, I think it was about $1,500. So I bought into a little restaurant called the Wooden Horse. And with that, I was able to get my green card to stay. So I actually stayed there for 26 years in California.
Yeah. And so what kind of a restaurant was this exactly?
It was on the college campus or just off the campus, and it was just really basic. It was a coffee house kind of, and we had little pizza oven, and we had sandwiches, different kinds of soups and sandwiches. And one of my partners was quite a bit older than I, so I wouldn't have done this at that time, but he played a lot of jazz and had chess boards set up, and that worked. And it worked for a while, and then I was just too young to have that kind of commitment, so I sold my portion of it out to him and just went off and did odd jobs, basically.
Okay. And so moving from Edmonton to California, was it the weather, the people, a mix of everything that made you choose to stay there?
In California?
Yeah.
It was a lifestyle, certainly. And that's where the hippie culture was. And that was definitely where I wanted to be. I wasn't interested at that time in going to university, which is, what my parents always had planned for me. So it was just the freedom. And, it was all about music and freedom and friends and doing as little work as possible and still be able to go down to the nude beach. We went to the nude beaches or, just concerts. Like I said, just had a good time.
Yeah, because not everybody moves away from home. A lot of people do, but not everybody moves away from home that far away at that young of an age. But did you miss home? Did you miss family? Or you just thought this is it? This is absolutely where I need to be?
I missed my family so much. I used to go home regularly. I mean, I would scrape together enough for a plane ticket here and there. Or actually, truth be told, I think my parents generally footed the bill for me to come back and forth. I missed my family a lot. Yeah. But okay. I've always went home.
And you got to reconnect with them. Well, I think that your dad, from what you've told me, has a very interesting past. I know that he recently passed away, but
he did. Mm-hmm.
What was your father's first name?
Ross McBain.
Ross McBain. Maybe if you want to let the audience know a little bit about your mom and dad. What was your mom's name?
Dorothy.
Okay. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your parents.
Sure. Let's see. So my dad was, it's hard to know where to start. Okay, so I met him when I was born. So I really knew him all my life. He was a photographer when he was a young fellow. He then went into the Royal Air Force during the war. He was a pilot on aircraft that went onto aircraft carrier, that kind of thing. And he was always very funny, had a high quality sarcasm. Like my dad was the best sarcastic person ever. I mean, I grew up on sarcasm. So I think he was that way. I just guess how he was when he was a young man. Anyway, after the war, he came back to Edmonton where he'd been born and raised, and he started a business, McBain Camera. I think he started that business in 1948 or 49. He met and married my mother. I was born a short time later. Dramatic pause. And he went on to build a business of about, I think by the end of his career, which is when he died, because he went into the office every day till he died, had about 13, 14 branches of McBain Camera. So he was a big-time businessman in Edmonton. He joined everything. He was president of the Chamber of Commerce and president of the Better Business Bureau. And, that was he was sort of like, on Mad Men, that TV show. I envisioned him like that. He was out and about. And my mom was very, very beautiful. She was a fashion model for a while. And I think that's why they got together in the first place. They were both quite attractive people. And she worked at a radio station in Edmonton. That's how Dad met her. And they got married in 1947 and went on to have 5 lovely children, I being the eldest. And my mom was a mom. And she was a community person who, volunteered in the community. I can remember she was a teacher at Pedal Pushers. Do you ever remember?
No, what's Pedal Pushers?
Pedal Pushers is to teach children how to be safe on their bikes.
Okay.
And it was an actual sort of, I don't know if it was national or just in Edmonton, but it was an actual function, an organization, Pedal Pushers. She played the accordion for a while. She was a good mom. She was always seemed cheerful and happy. And unfortunately, she had a heart condition and she died at age 66, which was way too young.
Okay. Dorothy and Ross.
Mm-hmm. Dorothy and Ross.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, well, let's jump forward to being on Pender. And actually something that I wanted to make sure we absolutely touched on is the Speakeasy.
Oh, yeah.
Which is where we met.
That's right.
I'm sure. I think that's where we met.
Yeah.
I would think so.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the Speakeasy is a monthly event that takes place on Pender Island that you've been hosting it for as long as I've been going. And I've been going since 2010 because we were trying to figure out when it was you started hosting.
Right. It might have even been before that, now that I think of it. But I can't exactly remember. But Marianne Perret might remember because she's the historian of the Speakeasy. But for a long time. But the Speakeasy started with Pamela Brooks, who passed away some years ago. She was an excellent poet. And we started, as I recall, at least in my, since I moved to Pender, at the library. And that was before the new addition on the library. So there was a sort of funky little library room off the main part of the library. And every month, Pamela and some of us helpers would go in and drape the place with velvet draperies and Indian print draperies. And she had a place where we borrowed, I was trying to remember the lady's name who we borrowed all the card tables. So we'd bring in card tables and folding chairs and tablecloths, and we had candles. I mean, probably wouldn't be able to do that now, but candles on every table. And lots of people came. It was, I believe, free by donation. I can't remember. People would bring baked goods and tea, and we started having the Speakeasy, which, it was a place where people could read their original work, 5-minute limit, some beautiful work. In addition, Pamela started for several years, produced a book called, I think it was called Poetry on Pender. And she would take what she sort of juried it and what she thought was the best poetry of that year and published into a little spiral bound booklet.
Well, really? I've never heard of that before. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Pender Anthology, actually, I think it was called. Yeah.
Do you have any of those? Or?
I do. I do. I have some at home. I think I have them all.
Wow. Wow, neat. And so back in the day when the Speakeasy was at the library, was it any different than what it is today, would you say? Or is it pretty much the same thing in terms of the content?
That's a good question. I think it was pretty much the same. Of course, there was different people. The ambiance was a little different because Pamela was the host. And some people are gone and some people are still here, still going. So it was essentially the same, though. Yeah,
for sure. Well, it's weird. I don't go for a few months. I'll come back to it and realize, oh, wow, there's some new people coming. And it seems as if there's always something kind of fresh happening, that it always does seem to be evolving a little bit.
It does. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. But you've been hosting it for close to a decade now, if not more, right?
Right.
But anyway, and I got to say a huge thank you, because for me personally, that was such a huge boost of confidence to have something like that available, like just to live in a small community and have that. I remember the first few times going, I was so nervous to read anything, but it really gave me a lot of, I guess, just confidence to move forward and to try new things. But and I think a lot of people probably feel that way. I think that there's so many nerves during those evenings before people read, and then just such a deep sense of satisfaction from having their original work heard by an audience.
Mm-hmm. And in a safe place. I think that's really the critical thing about Speakeasy. It's such a safe place. And I have to say, I would have never guessed that you were nervous ever, because your work was always so good and so funny and so dramatic and so well done that I'm surprised to hear you say you were nervous, but you always brought something new to Speakeasy, and still do when you show up.
I'm busy now. I got this thing to do.
That's right.
But you always read some amazing poetry of your own, obviously, because it's original work. And when did you start writing poetry, Leslie?
I think it was probably in high school, sort of that adolescent angst kind of starts leaking out or something. And I realized I always loved writing since I was a little girl, writing stories or writing a journal or something like that. So it's hard to say exactly, but I think when I was probably in my late 20s or early 30s when I started realizing how much it meant to me and the satisfaction I got from it. I took a couple of courses at UC Berkeley, which was the most humbling, frightening experience of my educational life. I was a rookie. I really didn't know very much. And the people in the classes that I took, they had read a lot more poetry than I had, for one thing. And so they had a lot of experience. But it was a good boost. It was a good way to boost my work. And so I'm grateful for that. Yeah, and then I took some poetry workshops here or in Victoria. And I have a mentor who I dearly love, George Bowering, who is a well-known Canadian poet, and he's won Governor General's awards and for his both prose and poetry, who was a great mentor and still a great friend. So that was another, sort of inspiration for continuing to write.
It's interesting. I think a lot of people take up writing and poetry at a younger age and let it go and don't pursue it or don't follow it. But what's really kept you driven to continue to write poetry to this point in your life? What do you think is it that drives you about it?
Well, one of the things is that people seem to like it. And, when you get to read it in public and people give you kudos, and say, oh, I love that, or I love this, you think, oh, well, maybe I'm good at this. Maybe I can do this. I am humbled by so much poetry out there. I have a lot of poetry at home, and I try to always have a book nearby to just even open at a place. So I know where my skill is on that spectrum. I have no illusions, but I think having people appreciate it is big. It comes out whether it's good or not. Every poet will tell you that they probably write 100 bad ones for one good one, or 50 bad ones. I don't know what the count would be, but you have to write a lot of crap before you get one that speaks the truth, I guess.
So when you're writing the poetry, are you forcing the process along sometimes to get it in for the deadline of doing the Speakeasy, or is it when the motivation hits, or when are you normally writing your poetry?
That's a good one, because I'm so busy these days that it is actually the deadline of Speakeasy that makes me sit down. And we generally, we pull the random words from a box and use those for our inspiration. People can use them or not use them, whatever they like. But that does inspire me to just switch into a different mode and start to write poetry. And I, when I actually get there, I love it. And it reminds me that that's part of what my joy is to write poetry. Yeah, it's taken a sort of back seat to a lot of the work that I do now, but it's always there.
Yeah. And for anybody listening who has never been to a Speakeasy before, I cannot recommend it enough, because it is a really beautiful thing to witness people on the island. Some people some people you don't, expressing themselves through their own written words. And it's a really intimate and, like Leslie just described, a really safe place. And I always feel really uplifted when I'm driving home. Mm-hmm. Every time I feel this sense of upliftedness, and it's really a special, beautiful thing to witness people expressing their creativity.
It is. And people take risks. And that's what I love. I love when somebody who, like you say, has never written or never read their work in front of an audience, or never even considered writing poetry, but yet they'll come to Speakeasy and think, oh, well, if they could do it, I could do it too. And so we get these folks who are just putting their heart out there, taking a risk and and loving it. I feel the same as you. Every time I drive away from the Legion, I think, wow, that was so amazing. Yeah.
Totally. Because it can be one sentence sometimes that just really moves you from a piece of work or the entire thing or anything in between. But usually when my wife and I are driving home, we're just reflecting on the experience the whole way back. It's really good.
Yeah.
Thanks for hosting it for so long.
You're so welcome. It's my pleasure, literally.
You mentioned the skate park with the community hall. Would you like to talk about that?
I would. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Actually one of the things because it was another really fun thing. I think when Jordan and his friends were probably about grade 5 or grade 5, 6, they all started skateboarding. They all had skateboards. They were doing crazy things on the hills on Pender. We were going to town. I was taking a bunch of them to town on the weekends to go to the skate park in Esquimalt or in Sydney. And so it was a big deal. So we decided that we needed to build a skate park on Pender Island. And perhaps I decided that. Jordan and I decided that. So we looked around for some property that we could actually build a skate park. And then we were going to raise funds or we're going to get grants. We had some plans, right? And we couldn't quite get the approval that we needed for this one piece of land that was up by the water treatment plant. It would have been perfect, but we couldn't get the okay. There was too much red tape. So I forget exactly what else we did around trying to find a place, but we decided to build a skate park, a movable skate park at the hall. So we got some dads together, builder dads. I think Brent Marsden and Kevin Marsden and Pete Fennell and Carl Miller, and I'm sure a few others. And David McKenzie. We bought some designs online of ramps and different jumps and, all the gear. I guess we fundraised. We did. That's it. We fundraised. God, it's coming back to me now. Anyway, we got enough money to buy materials. And so we made this skate park. All these ramps and all the gear was on wheels with little brakes on them. So we had to, every time we had skate park, which was twice a week, for quite a long time, we had to roll these things from outside the back of the hall where we'd covered them with tarps and everything, roll them into the downstairs of the hall, set the brakes, set them up. Kids would play, skateboard, hoop and holler. And actually we had a girls' day because the girls didn't like that the boys were too pushy. So Friday was a girls' day and the girls came, Nadia Novak and Carly Baxendale and Laura Biagioni and lots of others came and skated on Fridays. They could come any time, but they had it to themselves on Fridays. And yeah, so that worked until I think we just got tired. Everybody got tired. And, it's hard sometimes to get enough volunteers to keep something going. And then, the rains kind of got into under the tarps and things started to fall apart. However, we were so very proud of having our Pender skate park at least for a year or so.
So it was inside the community hall downstairs.
Exactly.
And was it a half pipe or was it something?
We had a half pipe and we had a rail and we had some jumps. I don't know. Smaller pipes. Yeah. Pretty much filled up the base, the downstairs of the hall. That's
pretty cool. When you told me that a couple of weeks ago when we talked on the phone before doing the interview, I thought, what? There's a skate park on Pender Island before. That's neat. Was that the early 2000s?
Yeah, that's about right. 2004 maybe.
And there was enough kids on Pender interested in skateboarding.
Oh yeah, it seemed like there was hordes, but I mean it's Pender, so it probably wasn't hordes, but a lot of kids would show up. Even I remember Nia Williams brought Noel when he was about, I don't know, maybe he was about 4. I mean, he some little kids there, and the big kids, including Jordan. Jordan loved kids, and he would help the little kids learn to stand on their board and move around. So yeah, it was big fun.
Right on. That's neat, and it's nice to hear the fact that a bunch of the carpenter dads built this, and
they did. They were great.
Yeah, volunteering their time and getting it done. Sweet. Any other memories you want to touch on about, because you want to talk about school years as well too?
One other thing that I remember when we first came to Pender, and I think this was in my sort of bid to be part of the community, somehow I was informed that there was scouts and Cubs on Scouts and Cubs and Beavers on Pender, or they wanted to get it started again. I think there was already Cubs and Scouts, but there was no Beavers for the little kids. So one very strange day, I went to an information meeting and ended up, and I honestly do not know how this happened, somehow I became the leader of the Beaver Scouts.
What? What do you mean you don't know how it happened?
Because I think I'd put my hand up and said, well, yeah, I'd be interested in helping or something like that.
She's our leader. She wants to be the leader.
And the next thing I knew, I was standing up taking an oath of some sort.
Was there a Bible involved?
Probably.
Okay, all right.
I was being inducted into this sort of militaristic organization that I really, as a hippie, didn't really think that much of. But
did you get your own uniform, like a sachet?
I think I had a sash, and I had, I don't know, I probably didn't. I can't remember.
Okay, but anyway.
However, we met at the school gym, and there's a bunch of little boys, no girls, and we had Beaver Scouts. And the thing was, it was anyway, kind of a militaristic. You have to follow all these rules. And I do remember on Armistice Day, or on, November 11th, we had to have talk about war. And me being a, peace and love person, I was kind of going on the thing, well, there's other ways to figure out conflicts besides war. But, these wars did happen. A lot of people died and so on. And I can remember Michael Elliott going, yeah, I want to be a soldier. I want to have a gun.
You're like, oh, I gotta turn down that fire there.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. And my son Jordan was the most naughty of all the boys, and I actually had to. He likes to say I had to fire him from Beavers, and I did because he was a brat, and I think it's because I was the leader. He wouldn't have done it, if somebody else had been in control, but. Anyway, that was a short-lived but interesting experience at the Pender School.
I was just going to ask why the most naughty, but I guess when your mom's in charge,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's easy to be that way.
Yeah.
That's another. There's so many little interesting tidbits about Pender Island and little stories like that just get lost as history goes on. But Do you want to talk about Jordan now?
Sure.
Okay. All right. I guess just delving into the topic of your son Jordan, who you mentioned before, and he unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And maybe if you want to describe that situation and the subsequent involvement that you have with the job that you're doing right now.
I would say that the kids, as they grew on Pender and grew into teenage and middle teenagers, were doing pretty much the same things that kids do everywhere, or most kids, many kids. They were sneaking off to smoke pot or to drink a beer, at the swimming hole. That was one of their favorite haunts, girls and boys. And it was of concern to us parents. Certainly we were keeping an eye on it. We were picking them up from wherever. We were cognizant of what was going on to a certain point. So what happened for Jordan was I don't know why. I can't get into the why of it. I mean, I certainly have some ideas, but it sort of didn't end for him. He went to high school. He was skateboarding. He was still doing a lot of skateboarding, smoking too much pot, drinking, at parties and things. It seemed like over partying. That's kind of how I categorized it. And it was of concern. But by the time he was 19, he'd finished high school at GISS and was working on Salt Spring, doing, various things. He came to his dad and I when he was about 19, and he said, I think I'm addicted to cocaine and to alcohol, and I need some help. We got him into a rehab, into a recovery place in New Westminster, where he was for about 2 months. And he came out feeling pretty confident that he had beaten this thing and that he was okay. And that really wasn't the case. He continued, even though he was functional, always worked. He actually started his own business in his early 20s, but he was continually still taking different substances and smoking a lot of pot and drinking. When he was 23, and this was of great concern, but he was kind of out of our control. He kept close to us. He kept in contact and made me crazy a lot of the time, just, with his different behaviors. And when he was 23, he had started his own business called Island Sweeps. He had gone to Edmonton, got trained as a wood stove installer, and he had his certification on that, and came back and started his business with his girlfriend Katrina. They did pretty well, but Jordan was still into substances, and I don't actually even know quite which ones, or was it all, or I don't know. When he was 23, he had a back injury on the job. He went to our local doctor, one of our doctors who is no longer here, and that doctor prescribed oxycodone for Jordan, which is like the Canadian brand of OxyContin, an opioid. Jordan got addicted to it very quickly, and this doctor did not know really very much about opioids and about addiction. He continued to prescribe this to Jordan for about 6 or 7 months. Jordan was solidly addicted to that drug. And again, it's a long story, but the short story is we got Jordan into detox. He came out of detox and needed the support, which we couldn't find in Victoria at that time. This is in 2014. He relapsed after a few months, and he was able to, just by going to walk-in clinics, got a sort of a compendium of different drugs that were opioid-based. And one fateful day, he took a fatal combination of those drugs, and it stopped his heart. That was February 14th, 2014. So, as any parent or anybody can imagine, it was by far, and still is, the worst thing that can ever happen in a family, is to lose somebody from many causes, but from a drug overdose seems to have its own special tragic nature. So after about a year, I ended up sort of coincidentally meeting 2 other women in Edmonton who had similarly lost their sons to drug overdose. The 3 of us decided to start a group called Mums Stop the Harm. And our intention was to advocate and to activate and be activists to the government to make better drug policies and to have more recovery and more treatment and more education. We really wanted the government to act. So skip ahead to now, really, because we've been active and working super hard ever since. There's over 800 members of Mums Stop the Harm in Canada now, across Canada. Probably about 50 or 60 of those 800 are very strong advocates and activists for drug policy. And we've sort of evolved, which wasn't in our plan to begin with, but to be a great support for families who have either lost somebody or who have someone still in active addiction. Yeah. So, and I also now work and actually get paid for some of my work from the BC Centre on Substance Use in Vancouver, and I'm called the Family Engagement Lead. So that is just it, engaging families in new ways of thinking, evidence-based research around drug addiction and drug treatment, seeing what families want and what they need to proceed with that. So that's become my life. That and Speakeasy, of course, and a few other things. I teach some amazing teenage girls writing, although I don't really teach them. They gather at my house once a week for writing, and they've almost finished after 4 years of being together and coming over to my house. What I would call it's almost a novel. It's somewhere between a novel and a novella that Pender Island will see pretty soon, one of these days.
Yeah, you read a small portion of that at a recent Speakeasy, and it was amazing, actually.
Yeah, they're amazing girls.
Yeah, when Jordan died, it was a pretty big deal on the island. Actually, I had never had the pleasure of meeting your son, actually, but he was an island kid, and it really affected a lot of people. And it was definitely a big deal, to say the least. And subsequently, what's happened since that time with the transition within your life, with the work that you're doing now, I know that you've had a lot of fulfillment from that, and that you have a lot of interesting and positive life experiences that have come from that work that you've done. And I think it's pretty amazing, Leslie. I think it's really cool, and just when you came over tonight, you shared a story with my wife and I about just something new that's happened through the work that you've done that could have a positive impact in people's lives. And Yeah, thanks for working on that and trying to bring awareness and trying to make some real long lasting changes that could.
There's a lot of really good people working on this, and I'm proud to be one of them. And I don't want to do it for the rest of my life, but right now things are moving, and yeah, we're all finding some success with governments who are, well, when you figure over 10,000 people have died in the last 5 years. Probably 13,000 is by my count, which I've done sort of by Googling, have died in Canada from drug overdose in 5 years. I mean, it's insane. Mm-hmm. It's almost unbelievable. And we continue to not attend to that as a culture and as governments in a good way, in a fulsome way.
You know, it's interesting. I'm sometimes, if not most of the time, looking at this podcast as a bit of a historical document, and that thinking of people in the future listening to this 10, 20 years down the road, perhaps that would be incredible if that happened. And I hope that does happen. But to give a current day assessment of the situation, what is at the core of the problem in terms of people dying from overdoses? Is it the kind of drugs that they're taking?
Yeah, it is. That's not the core of the problem. That is basically the symptom of the problem. It sounds weird, but fentanyl is the drug that's killing everybody, and fentanyl is a black market drug. It's actually a legal drug in hospitals and medical settings. It's a very efficient and good opioid painkiller. It's used every single day in every hospital across the world. It's cheap, and it's an opioid, and it is replacing heroin basically for people who are dependent or addicted to opioids. It's also found its way into other drugs that are more recreational, like ecstasy and cocaine and crystal meth even. So that's what's killing people. But at the root of the problem, depends how deep you want to go, but the root of the problem is prohibition on drugs and the stigma surrounding drug use. We, as a culture, prohibition on alcohol happened, right, in the 19-teens, in the 20s, early 20s, and because a lot of people decided that it was an evil substance and that it broke up families and it made people addicted and it made them violent and all these reasons. What happened, of course, was that black market alcohol came to be, and bathtub gin and all the stills out in the woods and all that. And people, if they want alcohol, they're going to have alcohol no matter what the law says. The government, after a few years, and this is just the overview because the provincial governments had different policies and so on, but realized that prohibition on alcohol did not work. It brought up gangs, it brought up killings, it brought up, this toxic black market. It just didn't work. So they repealed that. And now today, any of us can go into thousands of different liquor outlets and buy safe product. Prohibition on drugs is exactly the same dynamic. People want to take drugs. They will get addicted. Just like some people get addicted to alcohol. And most don't. Most people who take drugs do not get addicted. But we see the ones that do. I mean, certainly the media makes a big deal out of, the downtown east side and all of that. If the government were able to see its way to providing safe legal supply of drugs to people who need them, we wouldn't have these deaths. The black market would disappear because it wouldn't have customers. And that's simplistic, I realize that, but the root of the problem is the war on drugs. So we always say we're fighting the war on drugs. We want to see people who use drugs decriminalized. We want to see the government to take over the regulation and implementation of people getting safe drugs. And that way, too, they can have options of recovery and all kinds of things. But the way it is right now, it's the freaking Wild West. People are dying all over the place. The drug thugs are making zillions of dollars. It's completely out of control.
Yeah. Well, hopefully things change sometime soon. Just while you were speaking there, I was thinking about my own choices about using mind-altering substances and why. And a question I ask myself sometimes before I do something is, I ask myself, is this a life-affirming choice? And Usually the answer is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
It's like before having a beer or
Right.
having a toke. It's like, no, it's actually not a life affirming choice. Sometimes it is, but usually it's not. And it's a form of escapism usually. And I think that so many of us wind up reaching for things to alter our consciousness just to escape. And there's a lot of hurt and a lot of pain out there in the world. And yeah, like in terms of like thinking about what the core of the problem is, I think it runs pretty deep, right? But what you're describing about having safe substances for people to use, I think is an incredibly important thing.
It is. And all throughout time, people have used mind-altering substances since early human beings. It's not new. It's always been that way, and it will always be that way. People will reach for substances to relax or to mitigate pain or, whatever the reasons are. Sometimes I'm sure life affirming doesn't actually come into the equation. It's more to be comfortable. And we have to deal with reality in this. We have to put our stigma aside and our old school thinking and just get real about it.
Okay. Well, to move into the second traditional question we always ask on this program, and I'll make the segue by saying thank you for helping many people along the way in recent years. And the second traditional question is, who's helped you along the way on Pender Island, Leslie?
Well, I have some favorite people who I go to, my go-to folks who I know care about me and value me. And I think that's how we make friends. We value each other and we care about what happens to each other and so on. One of my first friends on Pender was Judith Walker. Judy's been really important in my life. She's stood by me through thick and thin and all kinds of things. So I definitely say she's been super important in my life. Not only the fact that she is who she is, she's a lovely person. She's one of the most talented painters I've ever encountered. She's an incredible artist. So I'm one of those people who I'm not a visual artist at all, but I tend to gravitate towards those who are. I think it's my shadow self or something. So Judith Walker has been super important in my life. Right now, one of my best friends is Bruce Alexander, who lives on this island. He's the author of the Rat Park Experiments, which is a drug-related experiments that people can look up. He's written several books, but he has written one called The Globalization of Addiction. And he is very generous with his time and meets with me every few weeks for coffee, and I get to pick his brain. And so he's definitely one of my people who have really helped me here on Pender, and that's pretty recent. There's so many. When you say that, I think of people like Nia Williams and Yvonne McKenzie and Marianne Perry, and a lot of these people are poets, but they're also a sisterhood. There's a sisterhood here on Pender, and one of the people who's always been there for me and is a really good and trusted and amazing friend is Amy Heggie. She's not only a great artist, another one of my artist friends, and singer, and all-around amazing cook and trusted individual. I just want to say that a shout out to her for, we live just down the road from each other, which is really helpful, and have spent, a lot of time talking about a lot of things. I'm probably missing names of people I should be mentioning, because there's so many great women on this island. Yeah, so it's hard to pick out, your friends are your friends because you value them. So I value all of them. For sure. Well, almost everybody says, there's just too many people to mention. Yeah. I don't want to forget somebody, for sure. Yeah. But I just think it's nice to see the connections that exist that people don't know about on the island. Like we talked about family, for instance. Sometimes. Well, I was just going to say, I have to say my sister Diane has been my biggest. She's my best friend, really. And she's the one we talk every day, and we get to download, as sisters do, all the bullshit and all the great stuff and, the challenges. And so she's really the most important person. Yeah. Besides my dog, I have to say that, because, my dog is my other best friend.
What's your dog's name?
Rascal.
Good old Rascal.
Yeah, Rascal. Yeah, he's been with me since Jordan died. He was Jordan's dog. And as dog owners know, dogs are people. And if I didn't have him, I don't know what I'd do. He's been just by my side these last 5 years, just close as he can be. And boy, that's just so valuable to me.
He's a pretty cool dog.
He's a very cool dog. Yeah.
Definitely.
He's kind of a handsome guy too, as the dogs go.
As dogs go. I like myself a handsome dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned your sister Diane just before that.
Yeah.
And of course, without her, you wouldn't be on the island.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. That's how I got here to Pender Island for sure.
She was the first McBain to move to Pender.
That's true.
So in terms of what else is occupying your time right now, I hear you got a heat pump.
Yeah, I got a heat pump. I have a heat pump. I was shocked at how ugly it is, but holy cow, I've only had it for a few days as we speak, and it is so wonderful. I encourage everyone to dig deep and they're not that expensive, but they're not cheap either, but get a heat pump. Oh my gosh. Saves you money in the long run. The heat is beautiful. I'm so excited about the heat pump.
I'm so excited about the heat pump. I was actually just joking about talking about the heat pump. I thought it'd be hilarious because you just put a post on Facebook the other day about, this thing's so ugly. We had a big talk about it upstairs.
It's so ugly, but I'm going to get one of our fine crafts people here on Pender to build a box for it that works because it looks like it looks like I have a little bar fridge in my living room or something. It's not really attractive.
But if it works, it's functional. Works. Yeah. It's been 2 days though.
I know everyone says you'll get used to it, but I doubt it.
Well, is there anything else that you want to touch on? You want to talk about you want to send out to the people of Pender that they may not know about you?
Well, I can only say that to be in a community that is surrounded by water, that dynamic is really interesting because it brings a community together. It forces us together in a sense. It may be the good news and the bad news all at once because people love to complain about the ferries. But I feel so comfortable on this island, in this community. And that's to the credit. I mean, I blame that on everybody here. We've got everybody here the mix is amazing. We're not big on ethnic diversity, unfortunately. And the culture, we're so gay friendly, and I love that. And we have young and old, and we have creative and people who are working from Pender elsewhere. I mean, we just have such a rich combination of folks. So I'm just so grateful to be here and so grateful to live in the trees. Like I said, I always wanted to live in the forest, and living in the forest is what keeps me going, really. Yeah.
Well, when you say that surrounded by water creates an interesting dynamic, let's talk about that for a little bit, because I think it's really interesting that it does create a certain dynamic. But what does it create? So, what specifically would you say that it creates? Well,
geographically, we're all on this piece of rock, and we have to take that into consideration. It's not easy just to drive away. You have to be here. And, we all have our places that we love to go. I think out in the woods or at the beach or, on top of Mount Norman or whatever. But at the end of the day, we are in this together. We all have a feeling, well, most of us, I can't speak for everyone, have a feeling of protectiveness around our community. We care about each other. And I mean, certainly Facebook, people can say what they want about Facebook, but Facebook and like the market and the online forum, we get to communicate with each other. And that's sort of a sociological structure where we can see where everybody's at. People can express their opinions. People can have little fights on Facebook, and they do say rude things or say nice things. But at the end of the day, we're all still at the True Value, right? Or we're all at the liquor store, we're all at Joe's Place or at Browning or, any of the places. And we have to get along. Just the other day, I was at comedy night at Browning, which was hilarious. And I just recommend everybody go to every comedy night. It was so fun. A guy came up to me at the end of the night, and he apologized for something that had happened, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I don't know, an incident. And I was shocked. And so he'd been carrying this around, and maybe he'd had a few drinks or whatever. But, he just was like, oh, I just really want to apologize, and I'm not mad, or I hope you're not mad. And I thought, in the city, that would never happen. You just wouldn't see that person again. So it makes us sort of accountable. I have somebody I want to apologize to right now, and I'm going to phone that person or, somehow get in touch and say, I said this about that, but you know what? That was not right. So because it matters that we get along and that we're kind and respectful, and we try and be the best we can for each other.
That's interesting. It didn't sound like the person was apologizing because it was an awkward bumping into each other. It sounded as if just by circumstance of being in the same room together, there was an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I walked by him, and then he wanted to say that. So I loved it. I've had that happen. Another time I remember a person I lent some money to, and the person didn't pay me back for a really long time, and I kind of gave up. I said something to him a few times, and then I just gave it up. And I swear it was about 5 years later, he came up to me in the pharmacy and handed me the money. And I was so shocked and delighted, of course. I mean, the money didn't matter, but just the fact that he did that, So again, it's this thing that in a bigger, wider community, it might not happen. You might never see that person again, or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard somebody mention recently that we are surrounded by turbulent conditions because the ocean is all around us. And that it's funny when you go to an ocean lookout point, or if you're lucky enough to live right on the ocean on a bluff or something, it's incredibly windy a lot of the time. And then it gives you some perspective as to what it's like out on the water. But here we are on a little isolated island surrounded by rather turbulent weather conditions, and I can't help but think that plays a part in it. But I do feel a sense of peacefulness and calm that exists on this island. It's not an aggressive place by any means.
No,
it's definitely far more friendly. Maybe passive aggressive sometimes, but certainly a deep level of friendliness exists here, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's all different kinds of people here, like there would be anywhere, but. Yeah, I think, as I say, that being surrounded by water and not being able to just drive off into somewhere else, even another community, you have to wait for the ferry and do all that stuff and prepare and so on. Yeah, I think it's a really kind of a valuable thing.
Yeah. And
we're all here because we want to be, basically, right? Most of us are here because we want to be.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
If you don't want to be, it actually seems pretty easy to leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
People do it all the time.
They do. And
sometimes we kick them off too.
I know.
There's a dynamic there that, if you're a bad person and you hurt other people in any way, it's not going to be pleasant. So there's that side of it.
I've heard rumors that the cops somehow, quote unquote, kick people off the island, but I don't quite know how that works. But
I think that's true, and I don't know how it works either. I've never actually seen it happen, but I've certainly heard rumors, and I think that's kind of strange. You'd think they would, turf them off to some jail somewhere, but no, they just leave.
You mentioned earlier about it being not very ethnically diverse, but you said that it, from your perspective, it's a pretty gay-friendly island.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it seems like it to me. Maybe I'm not gay, but maybe I don't know everything. I certainly don't. But I think our friends that are here that are gay feel safe here and feel that, that their lifestyle works here and feel comfortable. We're preparing for our first gay pride.
Oh yeah, right.
Gay pride parade and day on Pender coming up, and I think our first meeting is in a couple of weeks. But yeah, which I think Sarah Ray was the one who spearheaded that. Kathy McIntyre and Amy Hagee and Sarah Ray and people like that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're reaching the end of our time coming up here, so I'm going to throw it back to you. We can go on for as long as the last bit as you want, but is there anything in particular that you want to end off with?
I'll end off just by saying, and this is just my personal thing, but my life plan, I'm 71 years old right now, and the way I look at my future, and like say the next 20 years, if I'm lucky enough to live that long, My goal, sort of my financial goal, and my goal is to stay on Pender till I die and to die on Pender. That's how much I love it here. I hope that happens. I'll do everything I can to make it be that way. Yeah, I never want to leave here.
All right. Well, I definitely want to thank Leslie very much for doing that interview. And to honor that interview, I decided that I would come down to the Heart Trail. So the Heart Trail is located on the North Island, and you can access it from Prior Centennial Campground or on Ketch Road. And it's only a kilometer-long trail that stretches in between those two locations. And I just came to a little bump out off of the trail here that is up on top of a hill. And there's the fading light in front of me right now. I can see the sky with purples and pinks and reds through the trees here. It looks like a beautiful sunset. I can just see little pieces of it. And the reason I decided I'd come to the Heart Trail is because I think Leslie has a lot of heart. And I just wanted to give honor to that. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Ptarmigan Arts Society for helping to sponsor this podcast. And until next time.